Hello. In today's video for Emerging Trends, what I plan to do is move forward with some of our functionality. Namely, I want to add in the ability to display the current step target using SwiftUI rather than SpriteKit. Now you may notice I found a comfortable place to code today, and that's because we're doing Apple development, okay? When you're doing Apple development, very important, if you can find a fireplace, a cup of warm tea, and a MacBook Air for your lap. Absolutely no Cheetos and no mechanical keyboards are allowed when doing Apple programming. Okay, let's get started here. My code. I can see that last time we created a class called UI Stats, and this is the class that our SwiftUI View is going to update itself based off of. Now right now we only have one property that we're observing, and that is the current objective, and that is a string value. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to add a second property here, and this is going to represent the steps that I still have to take to complete my objective. Now I could set this to 0, but really ideally what I should do is initialize these using an initializer. So we'll add in my initializer, and I have to specify two parameters here. The first one is going to be my objective, so and the second one will be my steps, and that is of type int. Now, these names I have for my properties, objective and steps, they're not the most descriptive, so I am going to upgrade these a little bit. So instead of objective, I'm going to call this current objective. And for steps, I am going to call this steps remaining. Right? Always important to give a little bit more meaning to your variables. Avoid specifying in the variable name what the type is, right? Because that's very obvious how it's being used, and you can easily read the code and determine that. All right, so I can set current objective equal to objective, and I can set steps remaining equal to steps. Okay, I'm seeing an error here. What is my error? I have to specify the type here as well. Okay, so string and int. Okay, so I just forgot to specify the type, so there we go. Here's my UI Stats class, and now I'm ready to basically hook up the steps data so that I can observe it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my content view. And right now, I only have the one text box. So I need to go and add a second text box. So I'm going to add that. And I'm going to have this one listen to UI stats dot steps remaining. And because I changed the name of objective to current objective, I have to make that change here. As well, where I initialize in my constructor here, I now have to pass in my two values. So objective, and I'll just say collect wood, and steps 0. Okay, so that looks good. Now one issue I have here is I've placed my text view. Right now it's being positioned using the Z stack. So I have two text views that are going to be smack on top of each other, and that's no good. So I'm going to place these inside a V stack so that they're vertically aligned. All right, excellent. That looks pretty good. Okay, maybe not. What do I have here? Text. Okay, so the issue I'm having is text is expecting a string, whereas steps remaining is an integer value. So I'm going to need to use string interpolation to convert from an integer to a string. And there I go, I've done my string interpolation. And if I have no more compile errors, I might as well go ahead and run this. Well, actually, if I run this right now, I'm just going to see 0 as the steps remaining. I need to actually go in and have my scene modify the stats of step remaining. That way it'll actually be displayed. So right now when I look at my walk scene, I'm not actually passing in the UI stats to it. So I'm going to need to modify to change that. So I'm going to say var UI stats. UI stats is the type. And I will need to now go and initialize this. So I will say stats. And I can just quickly go and initialize it here from the parameter now passed in. Okay, excellent. That's great. So I have a reference now to my UI stats, which I know when I change it, I'll be updating my SwiftUI View. So inside my timer that runs the simulation, I'm now going to change so that every time it runs, it's going to set the UI stats dot steps remaining equal to the steps that it's calculating as it simulates the movement. Okay, so I've done that. I think at this point, well, I still need to pass in the UI steps now when I create my walk scene. So I will say steps, oops, not steps, sorry, stats, UI stats, and let's see here, I don't want that. Okay, so I'm now passing that in, and I think I'm at a place now where I can run it. Now, just to warn you, when I run this, hopefully it works, but there is going to be a major error that we're going to see. It's going to be a logic error. It's going to be what's called a circular reference, and this is a very good error though because it's illustrative. It'll teach us how SwiftUI actually updates its view. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so as we can see, the character is updating, and you can see that the counter for how many steps they've taken, it begins to increase, but then all of a sudden it resets, okay? Now another issue that I can show you related to this, so I look at my stats for my performance, we can see that the CPU usage is at 10, 11, 12, we're at 13% there, okay? And the memory is at 9.5 megabytes, all right? And these numbers for such a simple app are too high, okay? So we definitely have a problem that is occurring. So I'm gonna stop the execution, and let's just run through what happens when we update our SwiftUI view. So if I go back to my content view, what I have here, this is the view that's gonna be displayed. And inside this view, I have an observed object, UI stats. What that means is any time that a property that I'm listing that is broadcast by the UI stats changed, in other words, current objective or stats remaining, whenever one of those changes, the entire content view is basically rebuilt from scratch, okay? So what that will result in is the constructor for my sprite kit view will be called, which will then recreate that view with the latest data. So the issue becomes, if I look at what's happening in my sprite kit view, you'll notice that inside here, I end up recreating my walk scene. So this is why I basically have a circular reference. Whenever I change my steps from, say, from 0 to 1, that triggers a rebuild of my SwiftUI view. That rebuild then results in a new walk scene being created. Well, that ends up resetting my steps back to 0, okay? Plus, I'm reinitializing all this extra data, right, with my scene. and that's putting much more pressure, as we can see, on the CPU and also on the memory. So how do I fix that? Well, essentially what I need to do is I need to remove the walk scene. It can't be placed inside my SpriteKit view. Instead, what I need to do is create that and pass a reference into my content view and then into my SpriteKit view. That way, inside my SpriteKit view, I can still make the call here to present the scene, which will render it, all right? But I don't want to have any initialization taking place inside any of these SwiftUI views. So let's go ahead and we'll make that change now. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to basically take out this walk scene. So this code right here, instead of creating it locally inside my update function, I'm going to remove it, and I'll have the SpriteKit view contain a reference to my walk scene class. And where I want to place it, probably I'm going to place it here in this hosting controller. So inside the hosting controller, this is where I initially create my view. This is where control comes first when I initialize my app. So I can go ahead and I'll just paste this stuff in here for now. But basically, I want to have a class variable here, and I will call this var walk, and this will be a walk scene. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'll create an initializer. So in this case, my hosting controller is inheriting from another class. So I'm going to have to, I believe I will have to override the init function here. And that means I have to call super init. And I'm now going to go ahead and initialize my walk scene. So I'm going to say walk equals, and I have these different values here, some parameters to pass in. So I initialize my walk scene, and I'm going to get the current device and the bounds. Now essentially what these two lines are doing, get the current device, get the bounds. When I create my scene, I need to give it a width and height that is representative of the actual screen size. So essentially I'm getting my WatchKit interface, the actual device, and I'm reading what is the size of the screen. Then I'm passing that in. Now it turns out that my walk scene, it's requiring a UI stats reference. So I'm going to have to go and also initialize my UI stats in my hosting controller. So I'll create another variable, so var UI stats, and it's of type UI stats. And in my initializer, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to initialize this. So UI stats equals UI stats, and I have to pass in now two parameters. So the first one is objective, and I'm going to pass in collect wood, and the other one is steps, and I'm just going to pass in 0. So everything is initialized now, and I'm passing this to my walk scene. And now when I create my content view right here, I'm now going to have to make some changes to pass in both the walk scene and the UI stats into my content scene. So the only sort of issue with my design right now is I have to pass these references around between a few classes. Not really that big a deal because it's a very small code base. So let's go ahead and make this change. I'm going to go into my content view. And here I am going to go ahead and create my UI stats. I already have that there. So I can basically just prevent the reinitialization of it. And I just have to say that it is of type UI stats. And the other property I want is going to be a walk scene. So I'm going to say var walk, and that is of type walk scene. Now, because my content view is a struct, I don't have to actually provide an initializer. SwiftUI provides a default initializer for me, so as long as I name my variables properly, so I have walk and UI stat, so if I go back to my hosting controller, I can now pass in walk, and I passed into that. Okay, so it is named walk. I could probably come up with some different names here to make this a bit more readable. And then the other one is going to be my UI stats. So UI stats, and the name there I have is UI stats. So I am using the same names there. Let's see if I'm getting any errors. Oh, I have the order wrong, so I'll just fix that. There we go. Okay, so most likely using the same name for the parameter in both classes maybe isn't the best form. I'm not quite sure about that. I'd have to look into it. But once again, we have a pretty small code base, so I think we can easily read the code and see where the parameters are coming from. All right, so if I move to my content view here, you can see that I have a walk scene that will be initialized, and I have my UI stats. All right, so I seem to be making good progress. Now, if I look at my sprite kit view, I'm passing to that my UI stats. So let's make sure that that's still set up properly. So I go to my sprite kit view. It's also a struct, so it accepts the UI stats. A default initializer is provided. And at this point, I come into here, but I'm running into a problem because when I go to present my scene, I don't have a reference to that. So I need to, in addition to my UI stats, I need to also provide a walk scene. So I will do that here. And now this variable is now declared. So I actually have a member variable named walk, which is the current scene. So when I go back to my content view, I'm gonna run into one small error here. Well, maybe a few. My sprite kit view, I'm passing in the UI stats, but I also have to pass in my walk scene. All right, I've done that there. So everything should be working. Of course, one additional error, my content view previews. So as we know, the content view previews is for developing and using the content features that come with SwiftUI. However, because I'm using SpriteKit I don't believe is going to be rendered inside my preview. So I'm not going to use the preview feature, so all I want to do here is make this compile error, or this syntax error, go away. So basically I just have to pump in some parameters here. So the first one is UI stats, so I'm just going to go UI stats, UI stats, and then UI stats, and I'm going to pass in here just some default values, so objective, I'll just say test, and for steps, I'll just pass in 0. And now for walk scene, okay, this looks like a little bit more work. So I have to now create a walk scene. And there are a few parameters to the walk scene. So let me go back to my hosting controller and I'll actually grab the walk scene here. And I just have to take my time and go through and fill out each of these parameters. Now remember, this code is never going to run, so I don't care if the data makes any sense. I just want the compile error to go away. So I'll substitute in my walk scene here. And right away I have my size. So I'm going to change that to 10. I'll just give it a width and height of 10. And everything else looks pretty good except my UI stats. I'm going to grab this initializer right here, and I'll use this again for my UI stats. And this should make it go away. It's not going away. What's it doing? Okay, let me just try running it. Okay, it expects another parentheses. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so I'm all set here. So let's just quickly review what we've done. We've taken the initialization of the SpriteKit scene and we've placed it inside hosting controller. This way we know that this will only happen one time. And every time now, when we reinitialize our content view, because one of the properties we're observing changes, we're not going to do any allocations. So our performance will be much better and our data won't keep getting reset, our step count specifically. So let's try running this. Okay, so this looks like it's working properly now. The UI is updating, and the character is continuing to interpolate across the screen. They're going to count up to 30 steps. When they get to 30 steps, the simulation should stop in terms of the counting and the character continuing to move. Okay, it's going to stop there. So great, we've made some good progress here. Now, one small adjustment I'll make right now, we still see that we're looking at the SpriteKit UI. And remember, we don't want to use SpriteKit for any of our UI. We're only using it for our rendering, and we're using SwiftUI over top of it to actually render the text. So I'm going to go to my walk scene, and I will just remove my stepchild text. And if I run this again, now I will just see the SwiftUI, of course. There we go. Okay, I'm pretty happy here. This is coming along. We've made some really simple changes, and our code is in a better spot now to continue moving on. So the next steps that we have to do are we need to be able to now set up a system so we can switch between SpriteKit scenes. So right now, when the character gets to the end and they've done, in this case, their 30 steps, we need to now transition to a new scene with a new objective. And if we finish the last scene, we need to show a SpriteKit scene that basically says you won or game over, okay? And possibly, depending upon how you set up your game, if you have a lose condition, you'll have to have a scene there that says you lost. So one other thing I want to point out before I finish this video is if I go to our shell here, I've now added our project sprites. So the actual images, that the high quality ones that I want you to replace what I'm showing in this video with, they're all contained in that folder. So that's one thing I'm not going to be showing you in these videos. I'm leaving that to you to organize these sprites and to set them up in your Xcode project and then be able to integrate them into your SpriteKit scenes. All right, so that's going to conclude this video. The next video I'm going to be showing you how to set up a manager system so that you can move between SpriteKit scenes as your game progresses. Okay, take care.